My name is Richard Pinsker. I'm going to talk about German remembrance culture and the media, a work in progress. Germany has made significant strides in remembrance culture and can be considered by many as the gold standard. The popular media in Germany, particularly film, have portrayed decent Germans as being victims of fanatic Nazi or SS commanders who were the real perpetrators. Consequently, the average German was a victim who had to follow orders and do their duty. This exculpatory narrative continues to be prevalent in the media. This framed the war as a tragedy that happened to Germans rather than the one they themselves caused. Scholars agree that most Germans were active perpetrators who were committed to the ideology of National Socialism and willingly participated in war crimes. The German way of warfare, mixed with racism and political ideology, made sure that the future war in the East would be extraordinarily brutal. German leadership was willing to fight a war of conquest and genocide. German leaders thought that this total war would be an existential struggle that required ruthlessness and brutality. Every formation in the Wehrmacht was made aware that they were going to fight a race war, and severe harshness was required. Uh, Wehrmacht soldiers from the beginning of the war guarded victims and watched massacres take place. Soldiers who objected were told to stand down. The army tried to justify its cooperation with the SS by maintaining a link between Jews, partisans, and saboteurs. As the war situation worsened, partisan activity increased. Jews continued to be the target of first choice. Most soldiers in the East and many civilians in Germany were aware of the crime being committed in the East. Wehrmacht generals ordered their soldiers to use the harshest measures without regard to the life of civilians. They provided cover for the Einsatzgruppen and other killing units. With rare exceptions, the so-called ordinary Germans, therefore, were willing participants in the worst of these excesses and actively assisted the SS. German soldiers tried for war crimes, used the common defense that they were only following orders, but the tribunal at Nuremberg precluded that defense. Another excuse was that Jews were all advocates of Judeo Bolshevism that would certainly join the terrorist partisans. This argument fell apart when the murder of Jewish children was brought up in the trial of an SS war criminal. The weak reasoning offered by the defendant for killing children was that these children would cause problems for German grandchildren. Uh, German soldiers claimed that the necessity of following extermination orders was to avoid being punished by death or severe punishment. However, German historians found that not a single case where refusal to follow an extermination order by an SS officer ended up with damage to life or limb of that officer. Uh, the Murderers Among Us was the first major film after World War II. It was what we call a rubble film because it was filmed in all the wreckage after the war. Dr. Mertens was an embittered veteran. He returned to Berlin and found his battalion commander, Bruckner, who ordered the execution of Polish men, women, and children on Christmas Eve 1942, despite Mertens' objections. Bruckner is the perpetrator. Mertens is the decent German who has no say in these events but must carry out the commander's orders. Anti Semitism is not mentioned, nor even if any of the hostages were Jewish. Mertens wants to shoot Bruckner to follow the theme that war crimes must be punished, but eventually converts his hate for a demand for a legitimate state justice. Mertens is an executioner of justice, but also a perpetrator. Mertens' actions might suggest that committing to anti-fascist ideas and pointing out war criminals might lead to repentance. The 1959 film Dogs, Do You Want to Live Forever? Hunter wollt ewig leben depicts an idealistic officer in 1942-43 on the Eastern Front. Most of the on-screen officers are shown as honorable and brave soldiers who were victims of National Socialism, taking orders from fanatic Nazi and SS officers. However, historians have well documented that the division that these soldiers belonged to was involved in war criminals. These murders were carried out not only by SS but by members of this particular group of the army with full knowledge of their mission. Hitler and his unsound military decisions are blamed for the defeat and death of honorable soldiers at Stalingrad, and brave Germans supposedly risked their lives because of poorly planned Nazi policy. German atrocities and war crimes are not discussed at all. Scholars have noted that besides the SS Einsatzgruppen being of great importance in executing the Holocaust, other institutions such as the Wehrmacht, other state authorities, and private companies contributed to the goal of a German-dominated Jew-free Europe. So-called ordinary men in the police battalion of the Eastern Front had difficulty accepting their role as executioners, but they succumbed to situational factors to become perpetrators on a regular basis. They were legitimized their actions well after the war. The 2013 series Generation War, Unser Mutter, Unser Vater, can serve as an example of how the German media belatedly only partially acknowledged the history of war crimes and atrocities and anti-Semitism. This follows 5 friends, all in their 20s, from mid-1941 until the end of the war. The war generation has youthful hopes and dreams. It's brought to life with the intent to provoke an intergenerational dialogue on war crimes, while lifting the silence on family involvement in war crimes. National Socialism and the trauma incurred by German soldiers. At the time of its presentation, many cultural representations of non-Jewish suffering were flooding the market. Since unification, these presentations of German suffering during the war caused the Holocaust to become a competing national narrative. This film was aimed at provoking an emotional response that has been socially and privately suppressed for decades. The 5 friends, Greta, Wilhelm, Friedhelm, Charlotte, and Victor, the sole Jew of the group, present themselves as youthfully beautiful and vibrant. The Nazis appear as brutal and uncultured. Wilhelm will be assigned to the Eastern Front in order to commit war crimes before eventually deserting. His brother Friedhelm will join Wilhelm's unit and eventually transform a bookworm into a killer, committing war crimes. Charlotte, a novice nurse at the front, will denounce a Jewish colleague. Greta will betray her lover Victor with an SS officer to obtain immigration papers for Victor, as well as assist a budding singing career. Only Victor, the Jew, is the only one who does not collaborate with the Nazi regime, but he has to fight and kill with the Polish underground. The 4 Jews can now be called perpetrators by viewers, although Friedhelm has already apologized in advance that the war is responsible for their actions. Even though these young protagonists throw away basic human values, the film was applauded for showing the National Socialist era and how these protagonists were destroyed by a system they did not create. Their actions were reprehensible, but one can understand why they behaved in that manner. Each of the 4 non-Jewish protagonists all become guilty perpetrators. When Greta cuts out a picture of Victor for her passport photo, she has removed him from a group of the 5 friends. Victor has thus been cut out of the collective, signaling his otherness. This is a generation of bystanders, collaborators, and perpetrators who form the collective. The film has only made a half-hearted attempt at serious Jewish narrative. When the film tries superficially to acknowledge Jewish suffering as part of the national trauma narrative, it does not integrate it well. The viewers might lose their ability to identify and connect with their parents and grandparents if the worst of these deeds were shown. Some scenes of bodies in a swamp and dead Jews in the farmhouse were filmed. On the other hand, scenes of autotelic violence are toned down and Germans committing rape are not shown. Scholars also remind us that these parents and grandparents of today's Germans were a highly politicized generation that endured the Nazi racist ideology and supported the war. Wilhelm was already executed as Soviet political officer against the laws of war. He's assigned to a punitive battalion under the command of a fanatic Nazi officer who forces him to murder civilians and burn Russian villages. He later murders the officer who ordered these brutal attacks. Friedhelm is forced to kill civilians after being threatened by a Nazi officer for refusing to shoot. This is reminiscent of the 1993 movie Stalingrad. Again, we have decent Germans portrayed as being forced to do evil deeds by fanatic Nazi and SS officers. Charlotte's denunciation of her Jewish assistants takes a full turn when she is raped by Russian soldiers who've taken over the hospital The same Jewish assistant has escaped the Gestapo and now returns as a Soviet officer who spares Charlotte's life. Greta's Faustian pact with the SS does not spare her from execution for having expressed defeatist statements. This is an example of the decent German who tries to help a lover Victor but ends up as a victim of the cruel Nazi regime. The film makes little mention of anti-Semitism. In one scene, the leader of a Polish underground group, including Victor, encounters a farmer who will not aid them if they harbor Jews. The leader announces that he and his group do not tolerate Jews, not realizing Victor is Jewish. German post-war denial is giving way to a new and evolving collective identity and rewriting the nation's history. Instead of using repression, this view considers the final solution and the fate of the Jews to have been dealt with, but only superficially and reluctantly. This debate can move on to German suffering and victimization using this logic. The rift between private memory and scholarly discourse still allow many Jews, despite all they know about the Third Reich, to deny that their grandfather could ever have been a Nazi. Though great strides have been made in German remembrance culture, popular media still has issues that are illustrated in Generation War. Germany has committed a terrible genocide. It is also taking responsibility for what has happened, and it continues to address group culpability and accountability by a process of working through the past. As for popular media, despite great strides, it is still a work in progress. Thank you very much.